Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcouch. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast. We have a special guest today. We have from down, I think I could say this, from down under, we have Annabel Bateman. She wrote a book that at one point it was called Kiss and Make Up with Your Thyroid. Annabel, how are you? How you doing? Welcome to the Thyroid Answers podcast.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm great. It's a beautiful sunny winter's morning down here in Brisbane, Australia. So I am good. Yeah, really good. Looking forward to having a chat with you today.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know Annabel, I've been on her podcast in the past, and she's got a podcast that we're going to talk about a little bit. She's got this relatively new book out, and so we're going to talk to her about her book. I'm actually going to let her kind of get into her background a bit because she's got a little bit of a storied background. She's not a physician, but she's a person who's kind of lived this thyroid confusion model, or like my book, the thyroid debacle, right? That goes on with people who have thyroid issues. So we're going to get into a discussion about her background, how she kind of got into this, how did she get into writing books, and a lot about the book and how that can be helpful for people. So Annabel, do us a huge favor. Give some people a little bit of your story and your background. How did you get into this space where now you're writing your second book that has to do with thyroid physiology, because you're not a physician? So give everybody the summary version of, or I think it's chapter 2, maybe chapter 2, chapter 3 in your book.
Yeah, of my story. But yes, there is I think it is chapter 2 is my story in the book. So look, I grew up in Sydney. I was diagnosed with primary hypothyroidism. I've gone back. I'm one of these people that keeps all my blood tests and all those sorts of things. So when I was 22, I was at the end of my law degree. I was burnt out, but I was exhausted. My hair was, falling out frizzy. I couldn't sort of hold my arms up to wash my hair. That in the end was probably the defining moment where I'm like, this isn't normal. It's not normal as a 22-year-old to not be able to hold your arms up for long enough to wash your hair. And so that's when I was diagnosed with, what was then primary hypothyroidism. But I look back and, as we do, once we start digging into our thyroid stories and think, well, how did I get here and when did this happen? And you and I know that these things can go undetected for many, many years. And so I look back and I think for me, from that thyroid perspective, it probably was all triggered around puberty for me. I can look back at photos and sort of pinpoint it. You can see the puffiness growing in my face. I was definitely always battled with weight through my teenage years, which I just put down to being kind of lazy and greedy. I just thought, I eat too much chocolate, I'm not doing enough exercise, I must just, so all that sort of, I just got to go on another diet and I've got to work harder and I've got to get up earlier and do more, all of those. That sort of story was, when I look back, a really unhelpful story to be telling yourself as a teenage girl, right?
But that's a common story, right? And I think that's the problem. Part of that problem is nobody's telling you that it is a story, but it's not an appropriate story for most people. Because if you look at most people, I'm sure if you looked around, there were people that were eating more unhealthy than you were. There were people that were doing less activity, maybe they were more lazy. You were still probably fairly active. You were busy doing stuff. So, what you look around other people, you go, okay, I may not be perfect, but my life's not that much different from that person. And they don't seem to be struggling with the same issues. But we have a tendency to pat people on the head and say, hey, it's all your fault, versus saying, hey, there's something going on here. This isn't normal. And maybe we should help you figure that out, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, and I think, as a teenage girl, you're not really you are looking around at other people, but not in that, you're very self-critical as a teenager, aren't you? And my poor mum sort of feels a bit guilty that she's a nurse, so she feels guilty that she didn't sort of pick up the signs earlier on. But this was in the 80s too, and it is still more unusual for a teenager to have hypothyroidism, maybe less, more normal now than it was back in the 80s. But I didn't know any different, I suppose, is probably my point, is that really I just grew into it. As I grew up, I grew into having an underactive thyroid, and I didn't have a comparison. I didn't have that. I felt amazing. I was fit and healthy, and then something happened, and then I started gaining weight, and then I felt terrible. So I didn't have that comparison. It just felt normal to me. I just thought, this is who I am. This is what this is, until, my hair's falling out, and and I couldn't hold my arms up. Is that background noise? I can hear somebody in my kitchen, I think. Can
no,
you
you're
hear
good here.
Okay, that's all right. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think it's still until you get to those really, really unusual symptoms that you go, oh, this really isn't normal.
Right.
So, I was diagnosed in my early 20s. I went on the thyroxine, I think you call it levothyroxine, the standards, synthetic T4. I went to an endocrinologist. He just said, oh, you're lucky. All you've got to do is take a pill every day for the rest of your life and you'll be fine. Go away. He was very uninterested. I remember leaving that appointment crying, thinking, what? I've got to take medication for the rest of my life? And you're just treating me like I'm this simple case. That's how it felt. It was like, oh, there's nothing really that much wrong with you. You just take this pill and, get on your way.
But that's kind of the standard, right? We figured out a diagnosis, and we're going to manage the diagnosis, right? So I think that's pretty standard. Like, I used to be really hard on allopathic medicine because I came from that world, and I was like, we got to be doing more, but this is what's taught, right? So that physician that you went and saw may have seemed disinterested, may not have really listened to what you were trying to say, but in his training, his mind, I already know what it is. I don't need any of that background, background noise. This is easy. TSH high, T4 low, hypothyroidism, take a med, normalize TSH. That's it. That's what we do, right? So it's frustrating. You talk about the things to look for in a physician, so we'll talk about that because I think that's really important. But you got from, you spent time as an attorney, right? You had a lot of different things. What made you settle into doing this?
Okay. Sorry, I got distracted.
How did we get here?
You're right. So I started off as a lawyer, left that because I wanted to sort of make more of a difference in people's lives. And I became a life coach. This is about 20 years ago, before anyone had ever heard of what a life coach was. And sort of did that a little bit, then I had a couple of kids, had my life coaching practice around that, then had a break while I had a third kid. Then I went back I thought, well, I don't know that I really want to go back to just coaching, but I don't want to go back to being a lawyer. I think that was too stressful, and that's not really good for my thyroid health, but I wanted to be in that space. So then I went and did some family law mediation, because mediating separated families is not stressful at all, right?
Right.
So, but it was good to, again, be in that legal world, but not with the same responsibility, I suppose, as being an attorney. And I did find that really helpful. I really, liked working with people in conflict to help resolve that conflict. And a long time, I guess whilst that's going on, I've got my own thyroid journey going on, and I'm dabbling in food-related changes. That's really where I started making holistic changes to my thyroid health, was with the food, which I know is a common starting place. And so I like to cook. I come from a family that, loves to entertain. My mum and dad are the most amazing cooks and entertainers. So, I've grown up loving food, and I like to cook. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, now I've got to cut this out and cut that out, and how am I going to do that? And life's going to be miserable, and all of the things that I know people go through, I went through. And then
absolutely,
my naturopath said, come on, Annabel, like, if anyone can make good food, you can do this. So that was really helpful. You just need one or two people, don't you, in your journey, just to you can do this, And so I just started experimenting with the cooking, and then that led into recording my recipes. I started a little food blog, which was really just meant for me and my family. It wasn't really meant to become anything. It was just instead of having the exercise book that my grandma had and wrote all her recipes in, I thought I'll do a blog. That'll be kind of fun. And so sort of as it grew from there, and it became a bit bigger than, my friends started looking at it, and then someone said, oh, you should write a cookbook. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I should write a cookbook. So I wrote a cookbook. And so that sort of was my food journey, really. The cookbook's it's paleo-ish, really, gluten, grain, dairy free. And that was my food story. But I burnt myself out writing that cookbook. And so that then led me on the journey of there's more than just the food, in terms of managing thyroid health. Food can be really important and can make a massive difference, but it's still not the whole story. So that then led me down really kind of exploring some of the other things I talk about in the book. And then I realized, there's no books really out there that are showing people how to do this. There is some fabulous books, and another new one out with yours, which I've started to read, but we're going to talk about that on my show again in a little while. But I thought there's nothing that I could see that would really kind of, from a patient point of view, that could, it's not the why so much, but the how. And so I just thought, well, I enjoyed writing the cookbook. This was a very different style of book, but I enjoy the writing process. By this point, I had the podcast going, and I like to write. So yeah, and I like to help people. So I thought I think there's a gap in the thyroid book market for what I think I can do. So that's how I got to write the book.
And I will tell you this, I cruised through the book, read through that. And as we talked before we got on here, it's kind of beautifully laid out. It looks fantastic. And you give a lot of the how part. And that is, to me, in writing the thyroid debacle, that was the least exciting part for me, right? Because I'm this kind of nerdy, sciencey guy. So the second part of the book was like where I could get into the meat and potatoes and do all the stuff. But it's good to see. So my part 3 is really the summary of a lot of the stuff that you go into a little bit greater discussion with. And I think one of the things that you say in the book, and I think it's so important, there's a couple really nice pieces there. And one of those is that this is a lifelong journey when you've got a thyroid issue, but health issues, right? Managing a higher state of health is a lifetime journey, right? You never can get there and you're done. You're always constantly working on it. And I think sometimes, and I'll let you kind of dig into this from a patient perspective, people want to get to it's fixed and I'm good and I'm going to go back to my life and my lifestyle the way I was, and I don't have to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And I'm sure as a patient, you might have started out that same way, like, okay, what do I got to do to fix it? So I can just get right back to what I was doing. But you talk about that in the book, like, hey, this is not, there's no end point here. This is a constant journey, but it doesn't matter the disorder, the condition, the name of what you got. It's maintaining a higher state of health is a constant set of work. And people who do a lot to work on their health or their lifestyle or whatever tend to have the better lives, the easier lives. And the people that don't put a lot of hard work in, they do the easy things on a day-to-day basis, those people typically have harder lives, I think. So Tell me from a patient perspective, like, did you have that same mindset kind of going into it when you had the diagnosis?
Yeah, I don't think initially. I think initially I was probably just so exhausted. I mean, at that point, my TSH was 185 when I was first diagnosed. I don't even know how I was functioning. But so I think right back at the beginning, I was just probably happy to have an answer that there was something wrong with me and there was a solution. And that solution was take your medication. And certainly that helped. It definitely helped. It was probably a few years later that I started digging into, not even really digging in, but I came across a naturopath in a local health food shop who was into a lot of iridology. He was this really kind of funny old man, very quirky. And he was the one really, if I had have listened to him properly way back then, I could have shortcutted a lot of pain. But he was the one that really talked about cutting out gluten and dairy and sugar and all those, those things way back then. But I don't think really I was trying to fix anything until maybe the last 10 years, as I've really become aware that there are all these other things that I could do, apart from just take my medication. So I suppose once I got onto that path that, it's not just about taking medication, and I'm still on thyroid medication, that's probably when I started thinking, maybe I can fix this. And maybe then I did go through a stage where I was trying to achieve health perfection. And obviously that doesn't exist. And I think some of that goes with that being a fairly driven personality. Is, I don't think of myself as a perfectionist, but my kids say that I am. I think a perfectionist doesn't necessarily see themselves as a perfectionist. And so I did go through a stage of really wanting health perfection. I want the perfect labs. I need to be feeling great. I have nothing going wrong. Then not so much that I could go back to a different lifestyle, but then I would have achieved it. Then I've achieved this, I've done it. Like it's a goal to be achieved. Right. And as you say, it just doesn't work that way.
No, and you ask anybody, whatever level of health they're at, could you do more? And they're like, oh, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think from a health perspective, one, we've got to figure out what that means. And that means a whole bunch of different things to different people. Right. And that's the tough part. Shameless plug, in my book, that's exactly what I talk about. Like, what is health? And it's not this thing, right? It's really a continuum of illness to health. And you're somewhere on this continuum. And you have to have a pretty good definition for yourself so that you understand what you're trying to accomplish. Because if you just I'm trying to be healthy, because people say that all the time to me, you may have said it to your naturopath, you may have said it to yourself, I am going to get myself healthy. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And then I don't know what it means. It means perfect labs. Does it? Because I can show you plenty of labs that the labs look perfect, but the person's chronically ill. So what does it mean? And I think that's the real challenge that we have to do, is help somebody understand what is it? Because your level of health and my level of health are going to be different based on our environment, what we need to do and adapt to, right? So it's going to look a little bit different for each individual. And what you're trying to achieve is going to be based on what your goals are, what your desires are, what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah. It doesn't always look like a person with six-pack abs and ripped, right? Sometimes those are the least healthy people on the planet, right? Yeah. But I think it's important for us to define what's going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I talk about in the book that fits in with this conversation, like you said at the beginning, was we have to have a long-term perspective. And I think that's where I've come to, is that I have to understand that it's not about setting a health goal and achieving it. It's maintaining good health, whatever that means for me, for the long term. And I'm living with a thyroid condition forever. It's not, even if it's really well managed, even if it goes into remission, even if it, it's not impacting my day-to-day life too much, it's not really going away. I still have to, and that's okay. I think what I've come to the point of what I try to talk about in the book is that it's okay that it's a long-term thing, because that just means we've got a long time to try different things. Some things will work, some things won't. But when you have that longer-term perspective, you're not trying to fix everything straight away and achieve it all in a 30-day program or a 6-month program. That's probably, it's that tension, isn't it? It's like, we want to be making progress, but you've got to keep in balance that this is forever. So don't take on things that are really just only achievable for a very short period of time.
Yeah. And I think the title of the book, at least the original title of the book, was Kiss and Make Up with Your Thyroid. And I think we had this discussion when I was on your podcast, is I think we need to help people stop thinking about their body attacking them.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of saying my body's doing this to me, and look at it from a different perspective, or at least that's the perspective I like to have people look at things from, is saying, hey, look, the body operates in a low stress, primarily like a manufacturing, like a homeostatic state, or operates in a high stress cell danger perspective. And so if you look at what's going on, if you have chronic inflammation, if you have thyroid physiology challenges, if you have insulin resistance, instead of us telling our client, well, you have this disorder, you have this disease, this is your body attacking you, think about, that's a pretty defeatist attitude, right? It's like, oh my gosh, my body's coming after me. That can really create a ton of stress, versus, hey, the body is reacting to something. Instead of thinking your body is attacking you, think about your body trying to protect you from something. Now your job is to say, what can I do to reduce that stress, that tension, that those danger signals? And now you've got something positive you can work on. Well, how do I do that? Well, I eat better food. Well, that's a good way to reduce the stress on my body. How about I get more sleep? That's a better way to reduce the stress. And you take it away from my body is attacking me to my body's trying to protect me. I think it's just a better way to take a look at it.
Yeah.
And I think you're trying to do that in the book as well, is say, hey, here's all the things you can do. Stop blaming your thyroid gland. This is more of a change in physiology. And maybe, definitely from my perspective, is even from an immune system perspective, the immune system is saying, hey, wait, there's danger, slow down normal physiology, ramp up cell defense. And unfortunately, it doesn't make us feel and function awesome, but that's how the body's typically designed to operate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think simplifying it, well, I've found it helpful for myself just to simplify all of that down to, well, what can I do to reduce that sort of chronic stress, chronic inflammation? And that looks like lots of different things, but at the core for me, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And helping my body relax so that it can just do its job. And I like, I really enjoyed the conversation that we had around that cell danger response, and I've started to read your book, and I'm only right in the beginning of it, and it was just a good reminder. It was like, poor little cells are just trying to do their best. They're just trying to do what they can. And I think about that in terms of the thyroid, and the thyroid is obviously when I talk about thyroid, as you do, it's far more than just the gland. It's your whole body system that's working in with thyroid health and the autoimmune elements. But it is just trying to do its best, and so what can we do to support that? And that's why really I did call the book Kiss and Make Up with Your Thyroid, because we do have to make peace, I think, with that, with the thyroid, with thinking it's not going to ruin your life. Yes, you might have a problem, but, think of all the positive things that brings. And it's cute, the Kiss and Make Up with the Thyroid is kind of a cute name. Kiss sort of represents keep it super simple as well. That's a big theme of the book, is trying to, this can be really murky. Like it can get overwhelming because there are all the things. So how do we pare it back and try to keep it simple and just do one thing at a time? But yeah, as I said, I have actually just yesterday changed the name of the book to Let's Talk Thyroid, so that it is consistent with my podcast. And it's Let's Talk Thyroid, Positive and Practical Thyroid Help. And the content of the book hasn't changed, but just what I really want to do is get this book into the hands of particularly people who are fairly new in their thyroid journey, or new to the idea that anything other than medication might help. And so I think that person just wants some positive and practical help, Mm-hmm. And so that's really why I changed the name of the book. The content is exactly the same, just a new cover and a new title. So it's more about trying to get it more into the hands of the people that need it. And I suppose I thought maybe with the Kiss and Make Up with Your Thyroid title, we get it when we're a bit further along in the thyroid journey and we understand the need to kind of make peace and the mindset piece. we get that, but I'm not sure that if you're very new in that journey, it just might not make quite as much sense. So that's why I changed the name of the book. For better or worse, it is now Let's Talk Thyroid.
Yes. Hey, listen, I think it's a good introductory for somebody because they get diagnosed with hypothyroidism. Okay, what do I do next, right? And I think you do a really good job in the book, especially for that person who's really new into the stuff, without getting too complex with what's going on with thyroid physiology. And you said there's two big, I think right in the beginning, you said, hey, you learned two things that you thought were really important. One is this is an inflammatory issue at the heart of it. And two, there's a lifestyle components to this. And those are really important things. And I think for the listener, I think what Annabel's trying to do in this book is saying, hey, listen, it's an inflammatory issue and it's driven by lifestyle factors. Let's work on the lifestyle factors because that's essentially free, easy to do for the most part. And if your lifestyle and diet kind of got you into this process, if we kind of reverse engineer some of this stuff, maybe we can help undo some of the things that are creating the stress. Is that fair to say?
Yep, I think that's a very good summary. Yep, absolutely. And because I'm not a physician and I'm not the geeky, sciencey person, I come from that legal background, I didn't do science beyond grade 10 at school. So I've learned more about thyroid physiology that in the last probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years because I'm interested but I'm not a detailed science person. And there are some, the people like you and, other people that have written those books and they're qualified to write those books. That's not my space, and so I think that's where and I've say this in the book, if you want those really meaty that understand the science, then go to those places because it is helpful to do that. And I've found it helpful to read those books too, but that's not what this book is. I think because that's not me, that's not my experience. And I would butcher it. Like I've tried to do a summary of thyroid. There is a thyroid basics chapter in there, but it is pretty basic, So if you want the details of thyroid physiology, read the Thyroid Debacle.
But I think you did a good job of just kind of laying out the basic version of it. And I think that's important to do because you're kind of giving some general information, like here's some concepts to think about. And you talk about in the thyroid basics, say the types of thyroid problems. You talk about primary hypothyroidism. It's interesting you talked about cellular hypothyroidism. I don't, you obviously, I've been on your podcast. I thank you. You mentioned me in the book. But is that a topic that you heard of early on in your thyroid journey? Or is that something that you really learned more recently? Because it's one of the reasons I started pounding my fists is because I'm like, hey, we're not looking at really what's happening at the cellular level appropriately, but it's a lot maybe for somebody initially. But I think it's one of those things is somebody's on their thyroid journey and they're taking the med and they still don't feel well. That learning about that cellular piece might have the light bulb go on like, oh, I thought it was just the blood thing was all that I had to worry about. Now I got this other piece. So at what point did you have that frustration point where like, hey, my labs are getting normalized, but I still don't feel quite as good as I think I should? And was that topic talked about tissue or cellular hypothyroid then, or is this kind of a newer concept that you picked up more recently?
That's a good question. I'd say it's definitely more recently, certainly not early on. And to be honest, I don't even know that I've had that particular conversation with my doctor. So yeah, I think I actually can't remember, but it would be more recently, definitely. Yeah. And to have articulated in the way that you have has been really helpful for me too. And so I did want to put just that little bit in there because like you say, it's just that, it's just to hear all the different things it could be. Now you go sort out, you're going to have to find a good doctor and try to nut those things out, but being aware of the different things that can go wrong.
So as a person who's working through this process, right, and is now like a thyroid advocate to try and help people understand what's going on, what do you think is one of the most important lessons that you know now, or facts that you know now that you wish you would have known right early on from the start? And I mean, because there's a lot of really good points in the book, but if there's something that you would say to like if somebody said, what do you know now that you didn't know then, that would have made this journey a lot easier, maybe not better, because the journey being rough actually creates a lot of learning experiences, right? But what are the things that you think right off the bat? Obviously, you're going to tell me everything I wrote about in the book.
No.
But
I mean, yes, but the significance of stress, I would say, that's probably been the last piece in the puzzle for me, is really digesting that stress has such a massive impact.
So let's talk about that a little bit. When you talk about stress, because we all talk about stress and people are like, well, I'm not stressed, right? Yep. So give me your take on when you're saying stress, what you're talking about. I'll give my kind of add on to that. But when you say stress, the impact of stress, I totally agree, right? But what do you mean? What's your take when you say stress? Are you talking about emotional stress? Are you talking about physical stress? Like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's the internal pressure I put on myself is the biggest stress that I experience.
The emotional or psychological stress.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That sort of anxiety around it. But I think it's about, that internal, I've got to achieve this, do this, be that, that is probably for me personally the biggest stress. And so, because on the outside, I remember having this conversation with my husband, maybe a couple of years ago. So what have you got to be stressed about? I'm like, well, I understand that too, because I do have a good husband. My kids are good. Like on the big picture stress things, I haven't had anyone close to me die. I don't live in a conflictual household. There's lots of big trauma. It's taken me a while to understand that stress, it doesn't actually, I mean, obviously it matters whether it's big trauma, small trauma, smaller trauma, but your body still responds to it as stress. And so even though I can think, oh, look, my life is great because I don't have all these other big things going on, it doesn't mean that my body isn't experiencing, it's still responding to what for me is the smaller stresses and having a negative impact. And so it's taken me a long time to accept that, even though, of which I'm grateful, that I'm not experiencing big life major trauma stress. And so for people that do experience that, all the more that's going to have an impact. But even the small day-to-day pressures and just the busyness of life and living in the city with a family and, what's for dinner and, oh, I don't like this, all of the day-to-day stress has far more of an impact than I had given it credit for. And now I really see that if the thyroid really is a sensitive gland, then it doesn't take a lot of stress to have, a flow-on effect. And so I have learned for me that some of that is taking a bit of pressure off myself. Some of it is saying no to things. My kids are teenagers now, but I think I look back when they were little and I had 3 little boys around the house and I was trying to probably be in control of everything. I wasn't managing my thyroid health very well. I wasn't a very nice mum, I really wasn't. I know I was irritable. I was angry a lot. And so I think, I was stressed, and I think that was having an impact. Whereas now, and things go in waves. You can't change the stage of life that you're in. You've got to adapt to that. But yeah, I think it's that. So it's the little things. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an important part. So like when I talk stress, I talk like there's a lot of stressors, right? I talk about fitness factors, and we call them stress factors too. Dietary stress, right? Emotional stress or psychological stress, what goes on between the 6 inches of your ears. And it can be a big deal, right? Funny, I think I heard a statistic that men say about 200 words to themselves on a daily basis, and women say about 2,000 words to themselves on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, probably. I would say lots of tabs, but lots of tabs open.
Right. So like, what are you saying to yourself, right? So that could be a big deal. But you've got sleep stress, you got respiratory stress, you got organism stress, you got system stress, right? You got environmental stress. So there's all different types of stressors. And the issue becomes, how adaptable are you to those stressors? And I think for somebody even like you who has had a lot of stuff going on, you're filling up that bucket. I typically explain it to clients like, hey, you got 2 cinder blocks and a plank going across, and all the stressors of life are like 5-pound weights, and you just keep stacking them on that board. And at some point, you max the capacity of the board, and your tolerance for more is like zip, right? And so you're staying in this kind of danger state. And so it's interesting, though, when you said that, hey, the emotional or psychological piece is the biggest thing that you didn't give enough credence to. I think that's a lot of people, because people like that. I'm tough. I can manage it.
Oh, totally.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. I'm a thyroid warrior.
Right. Yeah. And okay, it doesn't bug me. I think sometimes, I did that with sleep. Like, I don't need sleep, right? Sleep's for the weak. You can sleep when you're dead, and you can, 4 hours is all you need, right? But we often put up this shield and say, oh, it can't be that, it can't be that, it can't be that. And many times it's the things that you're not willing to admit to are the things that are probably the biggest stressors. So I know you talk about it in the book. It's important, that piece of it, and you do simplify this down. But I think that's one of those important things that early on, if you can take a step back and say, okay, this whole emotional thing is probably the biggest driver. I'm trying to be perfect. I'm trying to do all the stuff right. I'm trying to do this right. I'm trying to do that right. And take into consideration that maybe in a healthier state, those things maybe wouldn't have as big an impact on you, right? If you had healthier gut flora, maybe you'd make more serotonin that would affect your brain, right? Maybe you would, if you didn't have problems with estrogen regulation, right? You'd be in detoxification issues. You'd be able to get that excess estrogen out of the system, so it wouldn't slow down your fight or flight detoxification pathways. So I think that's a really important piece. What do you think are key things that somebody who's struggling with chronic thyroid issues, what do you think are 3 key things that could help them understand that maybe this psychological, emotional piece is bigger than they're maybe willing to consider?
Well, I think the first thing is you need to be willing to consider that it is a significant piece, because ultimately, if you're not prepared to consider it, that it's a factor, then you're not going to. So that comes back to you trying to have a bit of an open mind and trying to. It's very hard. We can never fully remove ourselves from ourselves, but try to be that little external person looking at what's going on for you. I think writing a health history can be really helpful. Like, I know when I first wrote my thyroid story, which I kind of did for the cookbook, and I updated it for this book, it was very therapeutic. And it was really helpful to look back and think, oh yeah, there was that period of time, and that was, and I look back and I look through the stress lens, and I can see, we moved to Sydney when I was 8, from the country. That was stressful. My parents owned a news agency. They were really busy. That was stressful. There was a lot of stressful things. So writing a health history sort of should include all of that. I moved here, or this happened, or, my grandma died, or whatever, include all of the life events. So just writing a health history can reveal things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought.
Or compartmentalize somewhere else, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. I think writing a health history can open somebody's eyes to where problems are, and a clue that they're probably not willing to consider those things is when you get a health timeline that's like 3 lines. I was born.
Yeah. Okay.
I got married. I got a thyroid problem. Okay. All right.
So this is a person.
So this is a person who's got a bunch of emotional baggage, trauma, or something, because they're not even willing to do it, versus the person who's more humble, open book, is like, hey, here's all the things I had. Those are people I often feel are probably doing a little bit better job with their emotional and trauma and emotional stress because they're already willing to discuss it or talk about it.
Mm. Yeah, so I think that health history really, it just, as you say, it unlocks a whole lot of things. But I also think that maybe seeing it, I've written a little bit in the book about the thyroid person, what I've called the thyroid personality, which sort of ties into all of this. And it's that driven type A, overachieving, put everybody else's needs first, run around like a crazy person, you know. And I see it with women sort of particularly my age, maybe a little bit younger, with kids, and they're overscheduled, you know. They're running around every morning, every afternoon. Kids' needs are first. They're trying to work a full-time job, and they're burnt out, you know, because everyone else's needs come first. Everybody else's needs come first, and then you've got nothing left to give. So I think that all sort of ties into that, a bit of a personality thing. And I don't think anyone has a wrong personality. It's just understanding that with all the amazing things that come with being, you know, a high achieving, capable, competent, caring person, there is an edge to that can mean that you're not looking after yourself, and that some of those things are causing a whole lot of stress and might need to be looked at so that you can keep being a high achieving, competent, caring person without completely burning out.
And that's where I was hoping you were going to go with that question, because when I read that, I was like, huh. But I talk about this same idea and concept a little bit in my book, but I talk about with people. There's potential genetic predisposition for some people to be able to process kind of their fight or flight hormones really fast. So we have fast metabolizers, we've got slow metabolizers, and we got mixed metabolizers. And what you see a lot of times is those driven people, the type A person, the person you give things to get done, like, hey, we need to get this done right away, give it to Kelly, right? Because she'll get it done no matter what, right? We need somebody to be head of this committee, give it to Kelly, right? You'll get it done, right? Give it to Annabel, get it done.
Ask a busy person.
Right? Ask that busy person.
Ask a busy person, yeah.
And those are people who have a tendency to be slower metabolizers of their fight or flight hormones. Okay. I think it's one of the reason women are a lot like that, because they metabolize those kind of fight or flight hormones a little bit slower. So what happens is those hormones or neurotransmitters kind of fire the brain up. So they make us more driven, more overachieving, right? It drives that kind of pattern. The downside to that is that when they're healthy, they're great. Bam, 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 things get done. The downside is because they're slower metabolizers, when they get a lot more stress, they can quickly go into danger mode because they're not metabolizing. So think about women during their menstrual cycle. When estrogen builds up, they're more angry, they're more edgy. Husband and wife get in a fight. Husband's forgotten about it by the time he walks back to turn on the TV. The wife's still kind of angry like 3 days later. Why? Women metabolize those fight or flight hormones about 30% slower because of their estrogen levels. Now, if they have a genetic predisposition to be a slower metabolizer, and it's that time of the month, and they're under stress, now you can really sink that person. Then we have the real fast metabolizers. Those are the people like, they're super chill, right? Nothing bugs them, right? I got one of my kids, right? You know, it would have to be down to the last 5 minutes before something needs to be done, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I'm focused, right?
I've got one of those too.
Right?
What are you doing today? No, just chilling. Like, how can you be just chilling every day?
We call it like attention deficit. No, you give them something they enjoy doing, they'll get it done. Or you give them a lot of build up that anxiousness or anxiety, like it has to be done now, and now all of a sudden they've got so much of this stuff that they can actually focus and get things done. So I think there's a piece to that part of it that makes those people, so you talk about it as a certain kind of personality type that may lend to more immune, inflammatory, autoimmune processes. We know there's a genetic piece we talk about all the time, but I think this is one of those pieces that we have to consider, that this style of person, you often see it, a lot of the people that you have a lot of these issues kind of fit into that pattern already. So
it'd be interesting to see some studies done on it, wouldn't it? Like, you know.
Yeah. So if we look at it, when I was doing some work with Ben Lynch, it's one of the things we would talk about with certain areas of when we were talking about methylation and pathways and genetics and epigenetics. Those are pieces that we used to talk about quite a bit, and Ben talks about in his book. But I want to keep on this. There's some good stuff in the book, and one of the things that I get asked quite a bit is, how do I find a good doctor? And you give a list of some of the, like a checklist of things to consider. So can you talk a little bit about that from a patient perspective? What do you talk about some of this stuff in the book? So give us a couple of the key things that you think are really important for somebody to look for in their physician. Because some people go, well, that's who my doctor referred him to me, so that's where I need to go. And I'm always like, no, it's your health, your decision. You need to make the decision who you're going to see, right? Because you're ultimately in charge. But what do you think people should look for? Just a couple of key points that people should look for when they're trying to find a physician. And you can talk about allopathic physician and then maybe a functional medicine practitioner.
Well, I think when it comes to, if you've got a thyroid health problem, you need I do think you just need a functional. Now, we might be talking slightly different terminology across countries, but I think we need what I would call an integrative practitioner, someone who's going to treat you as a whole person, not just a thyroid gland or an endocrine system, but someone, and they can be a good general practitioner, someone who's going to look at you as a whole person. Someone that knows that testing more than TSH and T4 is really critical. So that if you ask for a full thyroid panel, you're not in a battle with them about that, and they actually know what that is, and they know why it's important to test for thyroid antibodies, because you can actually do things about your autoimmunity. So I think just finding a doctor that will order a full panel is really is helpful. That's probably a good litmus test, and someone that's going to be open to you exploring different ideas. Like if they're not fully, maybe you're in a town where you don't have lots of choice, but if you can find a doctor that is at least open to working with the way you want to manage your health, that's really helpful. So they may not be the person that's all over how to manage thyroid health yet, because maybe they don't know. But if they're open to learning, or open to you saying, look, I would like all these tests, or open to you looking into, obviously you can look into diet and lifestyle without your doctor's permission, but if they are willing to listen to you and be supportive of you managing your health in that way, I think that's helpful. Like I can look at, I had a brain lesion a few years ago, and I see a neurologist every about 18 months just to check in on that. And he's pretty mainstream neurologist. And I was originally, his original advice to me was to go on steroids to reduce the inflammation. And I'm like, oh, I'm not really too sure I want to do that. And I haven't done that. And I suppose that really catapulted me more into that, looking at, okay, right, I really need to look after my health holistically. And so every time I go back to see him, he's like, oh, I don't really understand you, Annabel. Like you didn't go on that, you didn't go on the steroids. I'm like, well, I didn't, but he's also going, well, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it, because it's really working for you. And so whilst he's not my regular doctor and that's not the regular issue, I've felt supported by him, even though I haven't done what he wanted to do. And I think there are other doctors out there like that, even if you can't find the ideal, the thyroid person that really understands it. And
yeah, I would agree with that. You got to find some. I think definitely got to find somebody you resonate with, right? So if you don't resonate with your physician, right, you just get a bad feeling. You just don't feel comfortable. That's not the physician for you. As the physician, I'm the coach, but I'm not the dictator, right? So if I'm not willing to listen to you and what you feel and what you're telling me, I'm not the right physician for you, right? Because the reality is what you tell me on a daily basis, tell me, okay, we tried these things. How did they work? I felt better. This is what I felt. What you experienced is so important to help us figure out how to fix stuff. You writing your timeline is super helpful because to help us figure out how we got here and how we're going to reverse engineer it. So you really need to have somebody who's going to listen to you. I would also be cautious of the person who says, this is how you fix it. This is the solution. This is how I do it with everybody. End of story. As you talk about in the book, as I've experienced in 27 years helping, everybody's a bit different. What everybody needs is a bit different. Lab values can be different for different people. 5 times today, I felt really good at this TSH. I felt better at that TSH. Great. Then that might be good. But my doctor says it's not good. Look, the lab values can change. Matter of fact, as you get older, it's probably better to have a higher TSH because it drives more T4 to T3 conversion. You shouldn't be a 1.0 if you're in your 50s or 60s. You should probably be in the higher end of the range. So we have to listen to what our clients are telling us. And then what my job is, in my opinion, is to help coach you, right? Hey, here's what I see. Here's what I think is going on. Here's a strategy, right? And how do you feel? Are you comfortable with that? Yep, I'm comfortable. Great. Let's see how you are. Let's reconvene in a few weeks, see how you did. If you're doing great, let's keep doing it. If you're not doing great, then let's make some changes because there is no perfect scenario. There is no one way to treat it. So I think it's really important that you have somebody that you can resonate with. You talk about a team aspect in the book, and I think that's an important. You need a medical doctor. Have an integrative or a functional medicine practitioner. Have somebody who's going to help you with your fitness and your nutrition if you need those things. So having a team, I think, is good. But I also do think it's really important for somebody to be driving the ship, right?
Yeah.
If you have too many people telling you, hey, I think you should take this. I think you should take that. I think you should take this. Then you got 10
and then it gets overwhelming.
Yeah. And so I think you do a good job in the book as well. We're going to talk about the 4 kind of key things you want people to work on in the book, because it can be overwhelming, right? It's like when you're trying to fix this thing, it's like spinning plates. Like, okay, now I got this one, and now I got this one, and now I got this one. And if you have too many plates in the air that you're trying to address all at one time, it's way more stressful, right?
Yeah.
So there's 4 key sections or components that you talk about that people can really focus on. You want to touch on those a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Mindset, unwind, food, and low tox. So touch on each one of those a little bit. Maybe give 2 or 3 tips in each one of those for the listeners.
Yeah. So the mindset one I've put first because it really ties into all the things we've already talked about. We need to understand that it's a long-term thing. We need to understand that, that we can take a holistic lifestyle approach, that those things can help, but it will take time and it will be different for everybody. And so I think a lot of that mindset element we've really talked about already. So the making peace with your thyroid and the words, the way we talk about our health to ourselves, there's a whole lot of stuff in there about affirmations and just, the way we think and the impact that has on our health. And we can all go through stages where you end up in this spiral of, and I've had it too, where this body part's not working and that's not working, and this is all miserable and terrible and horrible, and how am I ever going to live through the next 50 years and still be happy? And and then
the sun comes up tomorrow, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then you wake up and you're like, yep, it's a beautiful day today. So we get a fresh start every day. I'm very grateful for that. So, but that's the mindset part, is that it really undermines. So if you when we get to the food, for example, it's really helpful to have a good mindset around making some changes, because if you do think, oh, my life's going to suck now because I can't eat a piece of bread, and you're telling me that I can't do this and I can't do that, and all I really want to be able to do is eat a piece of Christmas pudding, and I can't do that, so everything's going to be horrible. Well, having the right mindset is going to help with all the other changes. So that's why that's really the first pillar or first section, because it undermines everything. The next thing I talk about is unwinding, because like I said before, that stress piece, I've realized how important that stress piece is. And I didn't want it to be I didn't want to call the section how to not stress or managing stress. I wanted to try to put that positive spin on stress, which was, well, we need to learn to unwind. Like, we're all wound up, so how can we learn to unwind? And that's obviously going to be different for all of us too, but I've tried to put some, I guess, some common things that people might do to unwind. That's where I talk about setting some boundaries and doing a bit less, actually do less. That helps us to unwind, gives us a little bit more breathing space. I talk about, things like meditation will work for some people. EFT tapping will work for some people. Doing jigsaw puzzles will help. Maybe going out, just out for a coffee with a friend and talking will help. So that's very individual, but critical that we all find what are our ways that we unwind. Essential oils I find really helpful. Like, I can have something on my desk and I can roll it on my wrist if I'm feeling really stressed, or I can keep something in my handbag. Those sorts of, what are some quick tools that if I feel even in the moment on a day-to-day I'm getting wound up, what can I do just as a circuit breaker to unwind? That might be taking 3 deep breaths. That's going to, I've found meditation doesn't really work well for me, but I like jigsaw puzzles. So, like, that's sort of different for each person. The food I've put third, even though that's often where people start, and the order I've put them doesn't have to mean anyone starts. You just pick and choose whatever is important where you're at the moment. But I think food is a common place for people to start in making these lifestyle changes. Certainly is where I started. I think people can get some quick results, even though it's not the perfect solution or the end. It's not all food. And so I talk about again, we're all going to end up with our own unique thyroid-friendly diet, and exactly what I eat is going to be different to somebody else. But the core pillar, the core theory, I suppose, is about removing those common inflammatory foods, gluten, grains, dairy, sugar, and at least seeing how you feel with that. So I would just describe the food chapters as paleo or paleo-ish, with then a recognition that for some people they may need to take that extra step of the autoimmune protocol or autoimmune paleo as an elimination style if that's not enough. And because I like to cook and I like, I'm a bit of a food person, I've gone in there. There's actually 3 chapters in that section, and the second one is, are you a turkey or a frog? Like, how are you going to do this? And so the turkey is someone who's going to go cold turkey. I'm just going to throw everything out, or I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to stop eating those things. I'm going to start, and I'm just going to go dive right in. Now, that probably works for a lot of type A personalities. That's how I did it. That works well for me. And every now and again, I will have a period of time where I rein things back in and go pretty hardcore, but that's not for everyone. And if the idea of that sounds stressful, then don't do that. You can be the frog in the pot that,
slow and
you
steady
build
change.
the changes up gradually until all of a sudden it's just permeating your lifestyle. So you do switch the gluten, your bread for gluten-free bread. And, but I think if you're the frog, it might take you a bit longer to really feel the results. But if you can do that in a more manageable, sustainable way, then there's no right or wrong way.
Absolutely.
And then I do, in the 3rd chapter there, talk about, it's not a cookbook. My original idea for the book was that I'd have lots of, glossy recipes in there too, but that didn't sort of pan out. But I do try to go through some approaches to food, how I approach our day-to-day living with our family, types of meals that I cook. There's a few very basic recipes in there, but it's more the practical, how do you actually have a breakfast that can taste good and it doesn't include toast or cereal? And then the final chapter is just that low tox living, reducing our regular exposure to chemicals, chemicals not good for our system, and all that estrogen, producing, all the toxicity, so what are some practical ways we can actually reduce our daily exposure to toxins. So, talk about, skincare and cleaning products. And there's lots of recipes with really basic ingredients in there just to make a clean surface spray. So every time you clean your kitchen bench, you're not breathing in chemicals, or, switching your plastic food containers for glass and drinking purified water. And, some of those things that over time can accumulate and be a really big issue, but we can chip away at those things over a long period of time. So that's they're the four core elements, I suppose, to what I've called a thyroid-friendly lifestyle.
And I think they're all good. I think they tie in with what I talk about on the podcast all the time. I think it ties in with the things we talk about in the thyroid debacle in part 3 of our book. And I think that's key. And I think sometimes people, they're looking for the supplement, right? Just tell me the thing that's going to fix it. And I think what's nice about the way you laid it out in the book is these are all simple strategies that some people may say they're hard. Some people say they're easy. They're all simple strategies that everybody can do. They don't cost much. And whether you have a thyroid condition or you don't have a thyroid condition, these are all strategies that are going to improve your health and your quality of life. And whether, we've talked about it, I've said this a couple of times, it doesn't, thyroid physiology to me is a result of what's happening in the body. So the more stress I put on the body, the more the thyroid physiology has to adapt to that stress. So if you want to optimize your thyroid physiology, you want to optimize your blood sugar, you want to optimize your gut function, just do the things that Annabel talks about in the book at a more consistent level, even from the food perspective. I mean, there's so many diet wars right now. People in the healthcare industry have circled the wagons and we've shot in, and we spend so much time arguing with each other about, is a vegan diet better, or a paleo or autoimmune paleo or carnivore, or like this carnivore is bad, vegan's better, vegan's terrible. Like really, people, if we're talking about whole food, how about we just all agree that whole food's better than processed food? And maybe that's where we put our ire, and realize that at any given point in time in your life, in your health journey, you might do better with plants. You might do better with higher protein, animal protein diet. Like if your diet is focused on whole food, that's a great place to start. And it's eat better food. You're more sustained. It's less expensive. At the end of the day, it really is less expensive. Everybody says, no, it's not, because that food is more expensive. Yes, it may be a little bit more expensive, but you eat less of it. When you eat a lot of junk food, you need a lot of junk food because it doesn't have the same sustainability or satiation in our system. So I think this is a book that almost anybody could benefit from. Your podcast, you do a fantastic job on the podcast. What kind of we had to leave people with kind of 3 key tips. This is a person who just got diagnosed with hypothyroidism, not quite sure where to start. Besides going out and buying the book, right? What would you give them as 3 key tips, 3 pieces of wisdom as they start on this journey?
So I'd say 1, take a deep breath. And it's okay that you don't have to do everything all at once. Because I think that's the danger, is you start doing lots of reading and research, and there's so many things. So just stop, just stop and take a breath, and just know you'll get there. You don't need to do everything all at once. I would say building your support team is really important to do fairly soon. So finding a good doctor to start with. And, and there's that broader support team, but I do think that's important. If you can do that fairly early on, and it might take a little bit to get that, but that's where, jump online. Like there's lots of local thyroid, support groups on Facebook. And I mean, I see them all the time. And probably the most popular question is, I live here, who's a good doctor? So finding someone is probably really helpful. And the third I would say is, well, probably if you don't want to read a book, listen to it. Listen to my podcast. Like I really think that's a good spot for people to start. I get that feedback that it's a good spot because you can just listen, like pick and choose an episode. Like they're all fairly, there's some good basics, so just get some good basics. Whether that's it doesn't have to be from my podcast, but that might just be an easier way, is just to listen to a few things, listen to a few stories of people who have been able to make some progress in their thyroid health and have some hope, because I think that's often what you're looking for too at that beginning, is you want hope, like things can get better. Absolutely. That's probably, believe me, I've had to borrow other people's hope, and so often say, if you don't have hope for yourself, I'm happy to lend you some of mine, because I have hope that if you're listening and you've just been diagnosed and you feel like crap and you feel overwhelmed, take that deep breath, find some support, but you can feel better.
Yeah. And I think you talk about that early on in the book, in your story, how you did require other people to borrowed some of that very early on because of the challenges that you were having and struggling. And I don't think that's unusual to you. I think it's pretty natural for people to be like, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. But I like the things you said. You take a deep breath, right? That's the first thing to do. It's not the end of the world. There's a lot of people that are struggling with thyroid issues and thyroid challenges. And there's lots of options and things. So it's better to take a pause, think, just relax for a second. Other people are going through it. And then you can kind of start to put together the pieces that you need and find which approach is going to be the best match for you. And then start working your way down that path. And as we talk about in the book, you talk about in the book, it's a journey. So don't think I'm going to get there and I'm done. This is a journey, right? This is kind of my body telling me, hey, it's got to pay a little bit more attention, put a little bit more effort into this process, because I'm in danger and I'm slowing down or shutting physiology down.
Yeah, which is really a gift, isn't it? When our body tells us something's not right, it's a gift.
Yeah. You know what? We don't think about that. We're in such a rush anymore to just take something and get rid of the sign or the symptom. And the reality is it's our body trying to help alert us to an issue or a problem. And if we're if we're open to those things, and some people are way more attuned with their body than others, man, you can start addressing things faster. And I think the other piece that you said was you got to have the right mindset, because if you're so busy looking at all the doors that are shut, you never see the ones that are opening. So I think it's really important to have the right mindset. Like, this has happened, but there's going to be something positive that happens. Because usually, if you look at your life, every time life was going fantastic, you thought nothing could ever go wrong, something does. And when things are at their worst and you think nothing could get worse than this, and life will never get better, what almost always happens is it does, right?
Yep.
And the faster you get there in either direction is when you're more attuned to what's going on, your eyes are open, and you're understanding that something's going to change, and you're going to be prepared for it. So, all right. So tell everybody, we want to wrap this up. Tell everybody name of the book, where they can get it, what the name of the podcast is, where they can listen to it, and if they want more information, where can they find you?
Okay, so the book is called Let's Talk Thyroid. The podcast is called Let's Talk Thyroid. So if you're outside of Australia, the book is available on Amazon, or the book is available on Amazon anywhere around the world that you can buy through Amazon. So just search Let's Talk Thyroid and you can get it there. If you're in Australia, you can buy it directly from me on my website, which is annabelbateman.com. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram as annabel.bateman.wellness. But if you can't find me, just head to my website. That's probably the simplest thing. Everything's linked there, and Amazon for the book.
All right. Well, I think I think especially for the person who's new into this process and trying to figure out how to start this navigation process, I think it's a fantastic book to get a hold of. It does tie right into everything I talk about on my podcast and what I talk about in my book. So I think it's a great book. I think you did a great job with it. I think it's laid out beautifully. I'm almost like jealous how nice it looks on the inside, but it's not good to be jealous. So, no, but I think you did a fantastic job. They're two very different books. I'm excited to get into your book too. And I just,
we're going to help people in different ways. And I think that is, that's fabulous. Different people at different points on the journey. So Yeah. Look, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it and to talk thyroid with you and your listeners. I really appreciate that.
You got it. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and tune in, buy her book, and tune into her podcast. You have a great rest of your Australian winter until we talk again, okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much.
You got it.